So the first of the speakers in the event is Marc Theeuwes. As we know, Marc is a managing director at CITRIS Foundry. He has Masters of Engineering from Stanford and have a very broad expertise in electrical engineering, robotics, computer science, finances, investment banking, and have worked with different companies and a plethora of experience of working at different boards and companies. And the second speaker on the event for the audience is Sravan. Sravan is also nicknamed as a serial entrepreneur. He started early career at Samba TV, founded Civil Maps in 2015, and raised a lot of money. And then the Civil Maps got acquired by Luminar, a leading developer of LiDAR tech for autonomous vehicles, and then founded HyperspecAI company focusing on providing MLOps solutions for robotics applications. A thought leader in AI, Sravan is a thought leader in AI and robotics industry. And the last but not the least speaker in the list is Charlie. He's a founder, CEO of mFluiDx, author of 11 issued patents. That's a lot. A UCSF graduate, PhD in bioengineering, molecular POC diagnostic technologies, expertise in molecular point of care diagnostics, more than 4.9 million US dollar funding from NSF, NIH, SBIR, Gates Foundation, and DARPA. That's a lot of money bringing from different foundations. We would like to get to know more about that later as well, and got trained at different training centers, Skydeck, CITRIS Foundry, IndieBio, and ICOPS. So before much ado, I would like Marc to take note and share his thoughts. Thank you.
Super. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to present here. And I'm really happy that I get to go first because I'm sure that Sravan and Charlie have a lot of interesting things to add, being actual founders of startups. What I'll take you through is kind of a bit of a nuts and bolts sort of process / methodology for, approaching the idea of building out an advisory network. What's the purpose of it? We'll talk about the different, dimensions of an advisory network, the type of advisor, what's the time frame of when to choose them and when to work in them, depending on the stage of the company, how to create those connections, building and managing the relationship, and then just getting started. These slides are actually a distillation from a longer article about this particular topic. If anybody has interest in receiving a copy of that, you're welcome to email me afterwards, and I'm happy to send it to you. Just a little bit of a background on CITRIS Foundry. CITRIS is a multi-campus institute, one of the Gray Davis Institutes. It's been in operations for 20 years, focused on information technology in the interest of society. The Foundry is the institute's startup incubator program, been active for 10 years. It's supported about 125 projects to date, of which many have gone on to receive follow-on funding, many in software and IT, AI and ML, bio and life science has been popular areas, as well as sensors and electronics. And the program offers incubation support for teams that are interested in starting a company, developing technologies and products, and finishing the program being what we call venture ready. The program provides legal, banking, funding support, technical and advisory support as well, and supports multiple campuses: Berkeley, UC Davis Health, UC Davis, UC Merced, and UC Santa Cruz. If anybody has more questions about that, please feel free to reach out. So let me start by just kind of giving a little bit of a backdrop about, just sort of relationships related to companies in general, and where Board of Advisors sort of sits within that. The box on the left-hand side is sort of the relationships inside the company. Some entities within the company are dealing more with strategic issues related to the company. Other entities within the company and staff are dealing more with operationals and implementation issues related to the company. So up in that strategic layer, you've got your board of directors and board of advisors. And then, very closely connected with that, obviously working on strategy as well, our founders, CXO office, VPs, and they translate that strategy into operational activities that the staff then executes on. Some consultants and law firms obviously are supporting, multiple activities within the company as well. The point of this, and then there's many, additional relationships with investors and supporting organizations on the business side, technology side, sales side, and marketing side. And as the organization progresses, advisors and potential advisors can come from many different locations. And but the point of this slide also is to sort of position the board of advisors. Typically, these roles are, mostly related to strategic issues, strategic trade-offs, most commonly not dealing with operational or implementation style issues. So an advisor network is really it's a group of individuals that share their skills and experience with the startup team. They're very often are picked by the CEO to fill knowledge and competency gaps within the company. And those gaps can be gaps on the technical side, gaps on the business side, gaps on just sort of general scaling and growth as the company progresses from one phase to the next. And we'll talk about each one of these in the next couple of slides as well. They provide advice, strategic thinking versus implementation. They're available to work, in some cases on an ad hoc basis, but very often are also very much directly connected with functional heads within the organization, and can very often work on specific projects also. In general, we want, advisors to be excited about the company, be available to be contacted and lend their advice, and really care about the startup's success and their forward-going growth. And these are compensated roles. Most commonly, advisory boards are compensated roles. In many cases, companies call them advisory boards, but they don't actually meet on a regular basis. Sometimes they do, but for the most part, they don't. And they're really engaged in a more free-form format versus a board of directors, which does meet on a more frequent basis and is required to do that. So let's talk a little bit about the type of advisor that companies would seek out. Advisors differ based on their expertise and also their stage. So some advisors, will be very strong in scale-up phase of a company's growth or in a growth phase. And then some advisors will be very strong in the earlier phases of a company's formation. We'll talk a little bit more about timing on the next slide. Well, let's talk a little bit about experience here. So as I mentioned, the advisors are there to augment experience and provide general experience, having, driven similar roads, have deep industry experience in different areas. And no startups are exactly the same, but, very often they have similarities within similar industries. So in looking for an advisor that has experience, if the startup company is in sort of the cloud computing space or has a networking angle, it would be wise to sort of look for advisors that are familiar with that particular market. Similar with, medical device industry, if you're looking for an advisor, if it's regardless of whether it's the technology side or the business side, it would be good to sort of highlight and target, an advisor that is familiar with the medical device industry or semiconductor industry, for example. The other thing that advisors can also bring to the company is, a real sense of credibility. And that credibility extends to both customer conversations as well as conversations with investors. So it's always great for customers and investors to see that the company has surrounded themselves with, experienced advisors that either have, market insight, technical savvy, understand particular areas of technology, et cetera, and can advise the company on making key strategic choices. So in terms of choosing sort of where to focus first, one approach is to sort of think about those highly strategic areas that are really important to the forward growing progress of the startup, figure out where those gaps are, and then try to target, advisors that can help fill those particular gaps. And then, as I mentioned, advisors will very often be paired up once they're brought on board with functional heads. So a senior technical advisor might be paired up with the CTO of the company. A business advisor might be paired up with a VP of sales and marketing, and et cetera, et cetera. So on the right side there, I just have a few example profiles, and we can just chat through some of these. And I think we're in a sort of a small informal group as well. If people want to stop me and ask a few questions, you're welcome to do that. But let's just talk through a few of these really quickly. So, for example, a CEO with good sense for business topics, strategic trade-offs, understanding how to look at a particular market and a landscape, and having industry connections, for example, related to the markets that we just talked about, would be a good advisor if that's particularly important to the company. A VP of alliances or business development offering expertise in partnerships and technology licensing could be a very interesting advisor. If the company is really working on trying to figure out its go-to-market strategy and or is in the process of sort of scaling, the advancements that it's making in sort of customer outreach, customer validation, growing the customer base, bringing on, an advisor that has experience being a VP of sales, might have deep experience in a market with industry connections, customer insight, market insight, might really understand the distribution channels, how to position and move a product into a particular market segment. They could be a great fit for the company. A VP of technology or a CTO could be a strong advisor as well. They will bring, a strong viewpoint on technology evolution, industry direction, implementation options, architectural trade-offs that could all advise the company. And then I've also seen, advisors be brought on board for specialty areas such as regulatory or government experience. So you might be working on a medical product, for example, that has to progress through the FDA, bringing on an advisor that has maybe already moved one or two products through the FDA and understands the process could also be a very good advisor. So they have different profiles. They have different profiles based on their expertise, whether it's on the business side, on the technology side, on the market side, and also on the overall scaling and growth of the company. So then the other dimension to think about with advisors is, choosing an advisor based on the time frame of where the company is today. So if you look at the little graphic on the right-hand side, I'm sure everybody's sort of familiar with the sort of S-curve, traditional growth curve. There's different issues related to, the company's growth at each one of those timeframes, whether it's in the incubation, validation phase, the scale-up phase, growth phase, and maturation phase. There's different issues related to business. There's different issues related to product. There's different issues related to sales and marketing, and also different issues related to technology. So advisors can be helpful to the company at a particular stage of growth. And over time, it's very common that advisors would come and go and phase in and out depending on how the company is progressing through these various different phases. So over time, you may work with a different set of advisors in the early startup phase with an advisor that maybe has started a company before and understands what it's like to start a company and move it to scale up. That could be a good phase to a good type of advisor to bring on board earlier on, because they'll have good perspective on how to progress a company towards that next phase. Or if the company's in the scale up mode and is really trying to head into a growth phase, it might be wise to bring on an advisor that has experience in that growth phase, because there's different sets of issues related to that. It's pretty common for advisors to have engagements that can be as short as a year and 2 years or longer, and periodically review those from time to time, but they'll have a different perspective depending on the kind of experience that they've had in the industry that they've had as well. So then the next thing, once you've sort of identified kind of what type of advisor you're looking for, depending on what are the sort of the top strategic issues related to the company, whether it's technical issues, market issues, customer issues, and you understand a good understanding of what phase the company's in, then the next thing would be to sort of start to build out who's a potential list of advisors that the company could contact. Building connections is a valuable skill. Obviously, it's always good to start with, the first level of potential candidates within the founder networks. The second level would actually be to, start going through introductions from colleagues, from firms, maybe in introductions through investors or through startup programs if they have mentors and advisor databases that you can mine and look into. You can certainly do a lot through, tools like LinkedIn, which I'm sure everybody's participating in nowadays. Alumni networks are also interesting. But also, as companies progress into particular markets, you start to get very specialized, specialized by the market, specialized by the technology. You'll get involved in different trade associations and different conferences, and those can be excellent places to look for advisors as well. Those kind of conference directories, the trade association directories, really try to sort of target folks that have very specific relevance to the company. And sort of once you've got sort of a list of potential advisor connections, then really think about how to establish that contact. And it might be good to, research the advisor a little bit before contacting them to sort of establish a little bit of familiarity, not really at a personal level, more at a professional level. And then, when making a connection to an advisor, to sort of test whether they would be interested, sort of, introductory, calls, really, approach the conversation with a relevant topic, maybe a set of questions that they could potentially be helpful in answering. And because that creates sort of the conversational medium for having sort of mutual interests and trying to craft a rapport. Having a pitch is really useful. Really great advisors are probably being contacted by multiple startups. And so, one of the things to work on a little bit is, how to make the founder sound interesting, how to make the company sound interesting, how could you, establish rapport and have a good starting conversation with them. And then the last thing is really to sort of leave that conversation as a series of conversations that will happen. Maybe set up a second call, have a Zoom follow-up, send information in before having a second call, maybe meeting them in person. Bringing an advisor on board is very similar to hiring an employee. It'll be a series of conversations. You'll get to know them, et cetera. And eventually, if there's mutual interest, bring them on board, which is sort of where you can then, really turn that conversation ultimately into a relationship, which is sort of the last sort of phase of it all. Once you've sort of checked for chemistry and fit, it's good to maybe have sort of a time period where you're interacting with the advisor, maybe formally or informally, just to sort of make sure that there is, relevant connection with their knowledge, but also just sort of overall availability. Some advisors can be, super impressive in terms of their background, but they may be so busy that they just don't have the time to interact with a startup. It's pretty common for advisors to maybe spend, something on the order of, an hour or two per week, maybe, in total, maybe 10 to 15 hours per quarter, is pretty common, something around that time frame. So you want to make sure that they have the availability and the time and interest to work with the company. Once mutual interest has been established, you can formalize that with an agreement. It's very common for advisors to have an agreement. It basically specifies the duration of the relationship, the overall duties, and compensation, which is very often made up of equity. So there's very, very common to have an equity relationship with the company. And then the last thing is really setting the advisor up for success and positioning them within the broader organization and with the senior management. Of course, as you're talking to advisors and potentially bringing them on board, founders will be talking to the senior managers and making sure that they're aware that you're looking for them, and they'll be on board with bringing them on board as an advisor. You want that to be a really successful relationship. Everybody should be excited to have that kind of tremendous support on board with the company and should be excited to work together. And then the last thing is really sort of managing the relationship towards success, which is, have things be topic based, targeting a few specific strategic projects that an advisor can get connected to and advise on a periodic basis, maybe a 6-month or a 12-month project with regular check-ins, et cetera. Once an advisory board has been developed, it's also very common to periodically review it and look at the advisory board on a 6-month basis or at least an annual basis to make sure that all of the advisors that are participating and supporting the company are still very productive, that the relationships are productive, and that they are ones that that the company wants to continue to support. So with that, I think the last point is, that I'll share is to, really always be on the lookout for great advisors. And, as startups progress through the process, they'll be working with a variety of organizations and firms that we talked about in the first or second slide. The startup will be meeting with investors, the startup will be meeting with law firms, you'll be going to industry conferences, et cetera. And you'll have opportunities to make a lot of connections with influential contacts and have important meetings. And at all of those, there's a potential opportunity to make a great connection with someone that could turn into an advisor for the company. And it often is important. It's good to realize too that, connections mature over time. So even though you might meet a potential advisor that's just too busy to interact with the company at the present moment, keep the connection warm, and their schedule may change down the road, and they could potentially become an advisor at a later stage or a later phase in the company's progression. So with that, I'll stop. My contact information is listed there. If anyone has any questions, or if we're handling questions at the end, we can do that. But feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions.
Thank you very much, Marc, for such a nice presentation and the detailed description and what to look and what not to look, and where to look for the advisors and how to research them and things. So you have experience of working with Fortune 500 and so many other corporate startup corporations. So would you like to share some failure stories of your own, if you had any, or of your colleague, in such a way that, like, what went wrong and what could have been improved, something very practical?
Yeah, I think I do have one experience, and of course I won't name the company or who the advisor was, but I think it was really just around setting the advisor up for success. So this was a particular example where an advisor was brought on board to a company, and to specifically be a very senior level advisor on a particular market landscape that the company was interested in pursuing next as an adjacent market to take their products into that market. And the senior management brought them on with that great intent. They actually identified and brought on a great advisor. And then they just sort of dropped the advisor into the company without, providing sort of the backdrop or the strategic reasons why they would be bringing that advisor on board to the other, senior folks that would be working with the advisor, at the VP level and also at the director level. And so it's sort of made for a very odd initial introduction. The people inside the company that the advisor was being brought on board to interact with didn't really know why the advisor had been brought on board. The advisor sort of, didn't really understand what it is specifically that they were supposed to be helping with. A few projects were sort of kicked off, but there wasn't really a correct sort of relationship interface created so that people had a platform on how to collaborate and build up a functional relationship. And it didn't really set things up for success. And there was a handful of meetings, and then, the advisor, lost interest. And, that was just a case where, if the senior management or founders or CEO of the company has a particular interest in moving in a particular direction and thinks that an advisor is a good avenue for making that happen, one idea would be to bring into the conversation and into the selection process the people inside the company that would be the primary functional interface to that particular advisor. Who would they be working with? Why would they be working with them? Why would this particular candidate be a good selection? So they're sort of brought into the decision-making process as opposed to being surprised and then, not really know what they're supposed to be doing with the advisor. So it really touched on that sort of last point of sort of setting the relationship up for success. I think earlier than later, bringing in the staff and team that will be working with the advisors is definitely a good idea and highly advised.
So you mean there was miscommunication between the board and the managing team and the advisor, and the company was in a transition phase, taking on different role and different market, and that was the time when it happened. So setting up the correct boundaries and the correct information, what is expected of, would be great to avoid with the advisors, and so not to lose the company's managing board interest either, as well as the advisors' interest in the company as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It just wasn't set up for success from the beginning. You know, there's great employees there. The advisor was terrific. They just didn't have the opportunity to interact and create that connection early on. And so, you know, things were it was sort of a forced relationship as opposed to a naturally mutually created relationship where, you know, the employees were actually part of the process and part of the selection process.
Okay, so thank you very much, Marc. We will keep discussing with you, and now we can I can share the screen. So our next speaker is Sravan. Sravan will be talking about. He's a serial entrepreneur. He has experience of founding different startups and bringing them to the success. So it would be great to have listen to your experience, and we are looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Sravan, for joining us, and please, you can take the
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really happy that this is a topic of this of this session. So I'll present things from more of a founder perspective, and sort of present the founder journey and how advisors play a role in the founder journey. If this is your first time creating a company, right? A lot of things that typically are top of mind for a founder is like, hey, like I have this cool idea. How do I go to market and get it, you know, sell this idea that I have? And typically what happens in this journey is that you start having conversations with people in the market, and, you know, people kind of agreeing with what you're saying, but you're not really getting the traction that, you know, you feel confident that this is a viable business. So one of the things that I found advisors to be really useful at is those people that can give me like candid feedback on whether my idea was viable or not just people who are like saying yes to be nice to me. So one qualifying criteria that was really important at the early stage of the company is an advisor doesn't need to be someone who's like super high up in senior leadership or someone who's like super connected. It could just be someone who listens to your idea, articulates it back to you, and tells you how they feel about it. And if they're relevant in that particular role, or they represent the persona that you're trying to sell to, or they represent a channel partner or distributor type of persona that will help your product get to market, oftentimes it's good to talk to these types of people to validate your idea. That's like at the very initial stage of your business, right? So at a high level, the question we're answering is, do people care? Do people care about what I'm trying to do? So if you hit that milestone and you're able to like articulate your solution, and you know you're getting a really solid response, then I think, you know, you have an idea that needs execution. And so when you get to the execution stage, I do see that there's various advisors that can help you with execution. You know, corporate governance is one sort of vertical where you have to like figure out company formation, cap table, legal representation, etc. So typically, like, I think accelerators are pretty good at doing that, but like you can also get startup advisors or other founders to advise you who've done that in the past. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is how to grow your team, or how to like fundraise, how to sort of structure your pitch in such a way that it's easily discernible by investors. So investors hear like 5,000 pitches a year or something ridiculous like that, or maybe it's 5,000 per month. But it's a really high number. And so their like attention span on a per pitch basis is like super low. So one of the things that advisors could be helpful at is taking a very complicated idea that you have, which could be tremendously helpful. But if we're not doing a good job articulating that solution to investors, they might not understand what it is. They might not understand how it helps the market. So simplifying complex ideas to simple sort of structured, into a simple sort of structured format is probably what the CEO will spend like the first 8 to 9 months doing. And successful CEOs tend to have that nailed down. There's a correlation between simplified messaging and sort of succinct messaging that's very targeted but very focused to like successful fundraising. So there's specific advisors that can help you do that. And scouting them out has been, for me, kind of serendipitous, because I kind of found some of them on Craigslist because I was doing like Python tutoring when I started out as part-time like revenue, and one of them happened to be like the head of strategy at Google Robotics. Like so don't always think that there's a formal channel to get advisors. One lesson that I've learned is like I attended like every SVB like networking event. I signed up on Lunch Club. So the trick here is to grow your network, right? So, and yeah, Craigslist. So the more you grow your network, the wider your reach is, and within that network, you'll find people that can really elevate your success. And that is one of the fundamental things an entrepreneur has to do. And so that includes like talking to customers, includes finding co-founders. And then in the first, like, I would say 12 months after you kind of nail product market fit and have fundraising, your next biggest problem is going to be hiring. Like, how do I like bring people on board? And so hiring is a challenge, especially for like technical founders who are really good at doing things themselves. Oftentimes they have to sort of unlearn some of the behaviors that they have in school, and they need coaching on how to create an environment where other people can come on board, join your team, and have a very conducive, like structured leadership succession plan where you start delegating, right? And oftentimes when it's your baby and you're very protective, that's really hard to let go. So there's certain soft skills. There's advisors that focus on soft skills like conflict resolution or team culture. I think that's really important. And the last thing I would say is on the technical side, there's certain advisors that understand and speak the customer language. So oftentimes when you're making a pitch, it's sort of using your context and your sort of structure on how you perceive that particular idea. So having the customer language is really important because the verbiage that a customer uses to describe the solution that they're looking for, if you can map your description of your product to match that, it's really key. So having customers as a potential advisor is one of the like fastest ways to scale your company, because if you can convince a customer or prospective customer persona to be your advisor, I think that's like rock solid. Other things I found is that the best advisors for me were people that could help me solve problems that were 6 months out. And I could structure advisor agreements in such a way that, hey, I need to tackle fundraising, or I need to find product market fit, or I need to scale my team, or I need to expedite hiring, or I need to find a co-founder. Like whatever those problems that a CEO deals with, I think advisors can help with that, or there's networks that can help with that, which is like accelerators, for example. In terms of scaling the company, I think the biggest problems that I personally faced was scaling teams very rapidly. So when I was at Civil Maps, we raised around 20 million in a very short amount of time. So deploying that capital and maintaining like high cadence and sort of the quality of the work output was really difficult because we were hiring people faster than we can train them. And so that's a lesson learned, right? How do you create succession planning and et cetera? So now at HyperspecAI, I'm doing a much better job with that because I'm taking my time setting up the training infrastructure so the company is like structured for success without as much friction. So I think there is lots of lessons an entrepreneur will learn along the way. And I guess my mantra is like, pay it forward, right? So when you get helped, help other people that you can potentially share knowledge with. And so the other thing that is really resonates with a lot of people is the give first mentality. So like help people without any expectation of getting anything in return. And typically that type of mentality has been helpful for me to network with advisors. Oftentimes we're helping each other as well. In terms of formal advisors, we have found certain advisors that we think can solve really key strategic problems, or help us unlock sort of strategic partnerships with customers. So some of them tend to have like a Rolodex of customer contacts, will want some form of, they're like quasi headhunters for customers, right? Like, so they'll go out, set up a bunch of meetings. You can schedule like a trip to Asia, for example, and have like a bunch of different product teams or executive teams that you can meet with. So there's advisors that do that sort of fill out the top of your funnel. And that's helpful for lead generation as well. Another place to find advisors is LinkedIn. So you can target people based on companies, based on their title. And also there's a lot of forums that are specifically focused on entrepreneurs as well. Is there any, I was going to ask if there's specific places to informally look for early stage advisors other than places like Foundry, Craigslist. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's definitely the key, right? Like I think the most useful advisors for me turned out to be personal friends, and they were at some point, there's certain aspects where I grew as an entrepreneur where they started asking me for help, and that's sort of like has been a back and forth relationship that I have with them. So the give first mentality was really useful there. But I'm happy to answer questions, because I do think being tactically supportive of like questions that are being asked here is more important than my story.
Yeah, that definitely helps. And thank you very much for sharing your story. We have some very specific questions to you, by the way. Some audience asked a question: how to find a CTO that is passionate and motivated to develop a self-driving car with you?
Yes. So I think finding CTOs is really difficult, because from a technical perspective, you need someone who has the ability to articulate the product and the vision and motivate a large engineering team. And you need someone who can sort of own a component of the business, right? And typically when startup teams get together, everyone's sort of really excited about the idea, but there's sort of a growth curve. Like there's a company life cycle, there's a product life cycle, and then there's the third thing that most people don't talk about, which is like the personal growth curve of each individual. So the CTOs that are most useful at the beginning of a company are people that can help you develop prototypes, help you set up proof of concepts, help you sort of get your idea to market quickly. If that individual is capable of evolving into a CTO that can set up infrastructure, set up automation, and help scale that infrastructure through CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, then they become someone that can grow with the company, right? So sometimes people can't make that transition because they're good at building features, but they're not good at building infrastructure. So you need to look for people that are well-rounded or are willing to sort of let go. I think, and focus on coaching and delegating at some point as the company grows.
Sravan, thank you for the talk and your exciting story. So I'm actually building a self-driving car based on unique technology, and we have the team and the idea, and we started to talk to customers. And my question was, is there a chance we can win you as an advisor, or at least to pitch you the idea and see whether there might be a fit.
Of course, yeah. I'm always willing to help. I don't really expect much in return. So if it's like a conversation, you want to pitch me your idea, I'll sort of like pitch it back to you, my understanding of your idea, and maybe that's like super helpful for you to refine the messaging, or to sort of maybe there's some hidden gems or insights that we can get from that conversation.
Yeah, that would be great. Then I'll ping you on LinkedIn if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm available on LinkedIn. I'll share my contact info here too.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. And by the way, if the one who is looking for CTO maybe could join our team if he's passionate about the. I mean, I don't know who asked the question about finding CTO for self-driving car startup. So we have a team.
Yeah, that was very subtle from Denise. So Naren has a question. It says, as an early stage startup, what and how can you give forward with a metaphorical empty cup and build a rapport with an advisor?
Building rapport with advisors is showing, like, in my opinion, consistency and sort of and cadence, right? So the frequency at which you meet them, testing out ideas and reporting back in a way that sort of can lead you to faster decisions. One framework that we use within our startup is called the OODA loop. It was actually invented by the US Air Force. OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. So the concept of OODA is that the faster you can iterate, the quicker you can get to a decision. So what really matters at the end of the day is your iteration speed. So the advisors that can see you make a lot of progress in a short amount of time, whether it's a yes or no decision, are typically more excited to engage with you because they see that you have like high energy and fast cadence. And again, that ties back into the idea of a startup, right? An early stage startup, the reason why startups are successful is, think of a startup as like a little powerboat that can go really fast and change direction very quickly. And think of larger companies as like kind of like the Titanic, right? Like they can't really steer fast. And so the advantage of a startup is that it can ideate, develop something, and move quickly. And if it doesn't work out, oh well, we can reallocate our resources to do something else. Whereas with a large company, they have a sort of cyclical dependency on their revenue, core revenue. And so they have to continue sustaining that, and launching new product lines is harder for them. So that's where I think the advisors that are excited are typically the people that see you progress really quickly.
Jonah has a question. Jonah, please go ahead.
Hey, Sravan.
Hi.
So I really like this idea of like preemptively kind of foreseeing problems that you were gonna have, and then trying to find advisors that could help you with this. Do you get a sense of when, because right now I'm looking in the future and I'm seeing just so many problems that we're going to have, and I don't know when it is an important problem enough that I should seek out an advisor to kind of best prepare myself to tackle that? And you have kind of a scale or a system that you can kind of follow?
Yeah, so typically you have the product life cycle, and that goes through like ideation, develop, iteration, launch, stabilization, maintain, or kill from a product perspective. And then a company life cycle, which is like startup, growth, maturity, and decline, right? So each one of those sort of cross sections will have different sort of priorities and problems that come with it. So I think the based on the product life cycle and based on what, from an org perspective, what you need, and based on like your financial projections or the targets that you set for yourself, the problems that are important to you will change. And one framework that I use is called the Eisenhower matrix. And so there's problems that I will personally like prioritize as the most important problems. And another way to visualize this is, let's say you have a board, right? The board doesn't care about all the nitty-gritty detail. And if you can imagine a wall with like 1,000 knobs that you can turn, not every knob like moves the needle on your business. There's certain knobs that will dramatically determine the success of your business. And so the goal of the entrepreneur is to find the knobs that, or the levers that you can pull to scale up faster and get to success faster, right? And so typically that's tied to like some high level headlines that the board will care about, the CEO should care about, and the whole organization should be aligned to sort of execute against that. So it could be something like in the context of HyperSpec, it could be something like, hey, we want to help our customers calibrate their cameras and LiDAR sensors, and we need to get that done by hook or crook in the next couple of months. So that capability proves to all these companies that, hey, this is a real thing, we can scale it, and we can solve a real problem that they have today. There's also other features we could do, like, that are nice to have features, but maybe this is the thing we need to focus on. So having that clarity of priority and the clarity around which levers actually affect the viability of the company, I think is key. And sometimes advisors, specifically like program managers, people that maintain like interdisciplinary teams or teams across different swim lanes, are really good at helping you formulate a strategy around that. And that's where I think someone like that might be helpful for you if you're trying to sort of organize your roadmap, organize like your sort of thought process around what problem should I be solving.
Okay, I see. So it's not so much about kind of solving problems before they arise, but more of like you were saying, these knobs and dials where you're just trying to maximize kind of the potential outcome of the solutions that you're solving. So if like in
your
text,
inputs,
right?
Yeah.
So this is the Eisenhower matrix. I just wrote it down, but I'm gonna look it up for sure.
Yeah, and you can think of a startup as an equation where you have certain inputs and you have an output, and your output should be greater than your inputs, right? And there's different variables and coefficients that you can change, and there's certain variables that don't
matter that much.
Matter that much. So just cross them out, spending time on that. In fact, that's probably a good way to think about it. Figuring out what you shouldn't be doing gets you to the right answer faster.
Okay, I think that was a great summary. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jonah, for asking your question and bringing it to the discussion. And we will take one more question before we move to the to Charlie. And the question is, at what level does somebody approach an advisor? What is their role in this process?
I think most entrepreneurs will know why they need an advisor and how that advisor can be helpful. There'll be a certain problem or pain point that you will probably encounter. Another piece of advice is, for first-time founders, there's a lot of common pitfalls that you can make, like when it comes to like equity negotiation or the way you structure your vesting, or what's considered normal and abnormal when it comes to like voting rights. Having an understanding of like what is good corporate governance, I don't think is ever too early. There's some basic skills an entrepreneur should have, like understanding how equity works, understanding how company formations work, how voting rights work, how liquidation preferences and valuations and exits work. Familiarizing yourself with that process is independent of the idea that you're pursuing, right? So I think in that context, I think getting advisors as soon as possible is good. Probably getting advisors around fundraising, just the mechanics of fundraising and how it works is good to educate yourself. But I think on the technical side and product side, I would do customer discovery first before getting an advisor.
This raises another question. I'm sorry. It is how would you distinguish when you are an early stage of your entrepreneurship or a startup that whether this person should be a co-founder or an advisor?
Work with that person. Just see if they're passionate about the work you're doing, and see if they maintain the high energy and the cadence for a certain period of time. And oftentimes maybe like the progression from advisor to like consultant to co-founder is also good, because you're sort of, a co-founder is essentially entering into a relationship with you for the next 8 years, and you have to make sure that you can do conflict resolution with this person. You can have really sometimes like adversarial conversations, but like be able to commit to the resolution that was reached. And because people are very opinionated, and startups are typically something that they're passionate about, I think the chemistry is really important. So don't just look at capabilities, but like look at how you're going to be able to talk through certain ideas, and figure out, based on your role, are you capable of leading this person? Is this person capable of following your guidance, or vice versa, right? If you're finding someone or joining a company, is this person a leader that you look up to? I think those are important, and having clear roles and responsibilities and delineating those early is also important. We also have something called intervention criteria. So even though roles and responsibilities are predefined, there's certain failure criteria that a person has where other people on the team are allowed to intervene. And that also includes the CEO, by the way. So those intervention criteria, you can sort of negotiate with the co-founder early on, prior to like, sort of, so that you own this baby and it's your responsibility, and you have autonomy of running like sales or marketing or engineering or whatever as a co-founder, but then you have some accountability to the other co-founders on your team. There's certain KPIs, OKRs, or metrics that you predefine and track.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Sravan, for your time. And moving on to now Charlie. Charlie has a very good expertise and track record in winning grants from institutions, and a lot of patents. And we are really excited to hear from Charlie. Thank you very much, Charlie. Floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today to just share and discuss a little bit. Yeah, so our company is working on point-of-care molecular diagnostics. So in a very short and simple way, essentially, we're trying to replace the rapid antigen test with a molecular test, like a PCR at your home or at the clinic. But we want to get to cost parity with rapid antigen tests, so we can replace that whole technology platform as a new gold standard for first-line infectious disease testing. So that's just a little bit of background about me. We are looking for molecular scientists. So if any of you are MCB or biology, molecular biology, I'd be interested to talk to you guys. So yeah, I'm not gonna, there's a whole lot of great points that Marc and Sravan already noted, so I'm not gonna repeat too much of that. I'm just gonna bring some highlights, some notes, some extra color to the discussion. So for us, how advisors have been useful, there's particular scenarios that's more particularly useful for us. One scenario is when you have someone with a lot of credibility. Let's say he's a VP of a very big company in this space, investors do tend to carry much more. They get much more attentive at the discussion and believe you more. So some things that worked well for us is when you're trying to pitch to investors, you get this advisor and the pitch as well, just to sit in and provide extra opinions or bounce ideas during the discussion. It really increases the investor confidence. Again, grants, they're great for grants because you know, you list this person, you gotta cover, you know, people. When the grant reviewers, they look at you, they look at the whole team, especially for like a SBIR type grant. They look at technical expertise and commercialization, marketing expertise. So you want to have a team that covers all the bases. And advisors is a nice way to cover that because you're not hiring a full-time person. You can hire somebody part-time on cash or equity, and then you can submit your grant just because of that. So the other thing that has been useful for us is apart from their direct advice, of course, again, it's related to pitching. So when you have a pitch deck, and then it's the same idea as a grant, when you present a team that's well balanced with all areas, it does help increase the investor confidence. Other things on how they help us, some of them come from the future M&A targets that we're interested in. So they can provide direct insight in how, you know, their company works, how they decide on M&A, and also they can provide intros directly to their business units. Or you know, these guys, when you look at high level, if you're looking at high level advisors, if they're like a VP somewhere, they may have been a VP elsewhere in parallel big competing companies before. So those relationships becomes more useful when they're trying to give intros. And the other one, of course, is investor connections. And this really depends on, not every investor will have a lot of investor connections if they're not in the startup space. If they're more, if they're like a big company VP, they may not know a lot of investors. So you got to balance this out when you're going into the relationship. You kind of know, you know, if this is going to be like a startup intro person or not. There's one pitfall for that, is every advisor will eventually exhaust their connections. So, you know, you cannot expect that they're going to have unlimited connections for you all the time. So that is one thing. Let me see. I do want to note that, you know, everyone, when you're in a startup, everyone is trying to give you advice. And a lot of the advice out there can be, some of them are good, but most of them can be bad and detrimental. So you got to be careful. And this is not just me saying, this is Sam Altman saying, so he's the head of YC. So there's a lot of bad advice that you got to be careful. You know, when you're considering something that's pivotal, that's a very important decision, you should get multiple data points on the same topic. Just don't rely on one person, even if the person is a hot shot. He may be wrong on one thing. So just try and get some more senior people weighing on the same thing. Again, the customer is the best advisor. So a lot of informal advisors is you really, so I find actually most of my advice, good advice, come from informal advisors, not the ones that you have a contract with. So a big chunk of that comes from your customers, and there's a specific program called the NSF iCore program that I would recommend everybody to do if they're starting out their company. Basically, it's NSF gives you a grant for $50K, and then you just go everywhere in America to travel and meet end customers and get interviews, and those are the best pseudo-free advice because it's on grant. The other great informal advisory pool is fellow CEOs, especially CEOs that's like slightly ahead of you or even much ahead of you. But it's more likely the people that are slightly ahead of you, they'll be more willing to talk to you. So I do want to drive that, CEOs are, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs' best resources and best friends. So you really have to bounce each other off. One way that we have been getting a lot of good output is, we can, like me, I can ask a fellow CEO, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you know anyone in this space that would like to invest? And I know you're doing this, and I know these investors, so let's do a connection swap. So you help me introduce 3 people, I help you introduce 3 people. And if you do this a couple times, you get a lot of just free advisory connections. And you're paying by your time. You're not paying by cash or equity. Other things is, for general stuff, actually, you can really Google a lot of stuff, like company formation, how to do it. You could just Google it and find a lot of stuff. And recently, something kind of interesting. This is controversial, but kind of interesting. Like if you try to analyze things, pros and cons of certain things. For example, I had a question on pros and cons of disclosing other investors in a round while raising, pros and cons. And I just, for fun, I typed this into ChatGPT, and it actually gave a really good response, 10 points for pros and 10 points for cons, and they were reasonable. So, just for fun, sometimes you can just ping ChatGPT, and it's actually quite amazing. So other stuff that are practical is in terms of engagement, contracting. So we came out of IndieBio, and the IndieBio leadership just told us, if you need to onboard investors, consider using something called a FAST agreement, F-A-S-T. So this is really nice because it's kind of like a safe note for investor advisory engagement. It's a standard template. There's nothing that you need to negotiate. There's a table on your startup stage, and then the agreed hourly commitment of the advisor. So you just go with that matrix, and then there will be a recommended equity package that's supposed to be industry average and fair and already researched. So we've never had a problem onboarding advisors using that. It's a very simple standard. You could just do that. The one thing that we tweaked with that for contract, which I think is more useful after the tweak, is the original vesting is just, let's say every month they vest. So we tweaked it to a time-based vesting, like every 5 hours they vest a block, because sometimes you need more help with them. Sometimes you don't need that much help with them, so you can tune that better by a time-based milestone. So that's called a FAST contract, F-A-S-T. We had a lot of success actually finding advisors while I was trying to find a C-level replacement. So our previous CSO, he had to transition out because of a family sickness. and we had to find a new one. So I did this really intense LinkedIn search. I read a couple books which about modern day recruiting, and I use all the techniques to do the search. But anyway, what I'm saying is I reached out to 150 people. I eventually screened down to one CSO, but I got two advisors that were they weren't ideal for a CSO position, but they were like ideal for the advisor position. And actually one of them was like a VP level in a huge company, and that worked out really, really well. So I think when you look for C-level people, you can go trickle down for advisors, and these advisors later on, they could come back to your C-level when you expand into the next round. So let's see. Yeah. So and final thing is, for very specific projects, you don't necessarily have to use advisors. You could use something called Upwork. You can find very, very specialized people, individuals, independent contractors to do very specialized things like a project thing for you, and it's just cash based, hourly based. And these guys are really qualified people that can do specific tasks. So just some extra tips and tricks over here. Yeah, so that's all I have to share.
Yeah, nice. Thank you very much, Charlie. So Jonah has a question, but before going to Jonah, I have a question, sorry, and this can be to all three of the speakers. It is, without permanent residency, is that possible to all to build a startup company without, and what to start from?
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant. I recently naturalized. I think as long as you have like a status to stay in the States, if it's like a work permit, like a green card. If you have green card, well, that's residency, right? But I remember I didn't get the green card right away, but I started the company while I was applying for the green card, and I had no problem with that.
Okay, so there's something called these different type categories of visas. One of them is extraordinary O1 category or E1 category. So that can be helpful if we have the startup already, but yeah, that's an entrepreneur visa, but you don't have the company yet. So what would you show? Because for the certain that you would need certain offer or the support from the company, but you don't have it in the existence. How would you
I think
prove
most
that?
people just do like a EB2, right? EB2 visa, or if your spouse is like a native, you can go through that. But the point is, when you start applying, and you get a EAD, like a work, like a card for you to work, then yeah, you can do most things. You can open a bank account, you can open a company. I had no problem. I didn't get my green card before I started the company.
Okay, thank you very much. So another question is how the diversity of advisors affect the startup? What is the importance of it in a startup?
The diversity?
Diversity of advisors. Does
Yeah,
it matter?
So, yeah, it matters. Yeah, it does matter, especially if you're grant writing. Because as I said, when you're trying to do a grant, you need to have someone who's knowledgeable in technology development, commercialization, marketing. So they just want to see a whole team. Not everyone has to be full-time, but they want to see a full team with all the bases covered.
Okay, thank you. Jonah, you had the question. I completely forgot. You can raise it up.
No, it's okay. Thank you. And thank you, Charlie, for speaking about this. This was really informative. So I was really surprised about this idea of a fast contract. I had never heard of this before. And I was wondering how widely because I didn't know about this, and how widely accepted is this in kind of the advisor sphere? And also, how does that impact kind of the relationship that you have with your advisors? Because for me, it feels kind of like almost like a transaction that you're having, right? Like, oh, I want this specific feedback, and so therefore I just do this small contract thing. And it doesn't feel like I'm going to build a relationship with that advisor.
The relationship, I think with any normal relationship, you got to warm up. You don't start with a contract. So, right. Before you get married, you got to date. So you really got to date. And when people start transitioning into an advisory contract, it's when they're committing, like for us, the minimal time, it would be like 4 or 5 hours per month. So that's quite a bigger chunk of time. It's different from you meeting up them once or twice, a little bit once in a while. So it's I guess the threshold is when it starts to feel like work for them, then you got to start compensating them. But you don't have to start that compensation relationship right away. Sometimes there are like really high level investors that okay, for sure this guy can help you right away, and you're very sure that you just want to get this person in before he's distracted by other things. That worked for us. Actually, we got a VP, high level VP. We warmed that relationship very quickly, just a couple informal back and forth, and it was clear there was synergy over here, and it was clear we needed like a couple hours, a bigger commitment from them. So we just entered that relationship quickly with a fast agreement, and that was very smooth.
All right, sweet. Yeah, thank you so much. I guess it was just I wasn't aware. I'm still new to this, but I wasn't aware that was the case, because I thought you mentioned earlier it was like a few hours, and I was like, wow, you can really just get advisors for just a few hours of communication. But that makes sense then. If it's like 5 hours spread over a month, then it's still a more like interactive approach rather than just like, here's a block of 5 hours, or like 2 hours or whatever, and let's discuss a problem. All right, well, thank you so much.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Jonah, for the question, and Charlie for answering it. And I think there is a couple of more questions before we finish from the team, and one of them is I think you have already answered, but I would reiterate it. What would be the best approach to reaching out to a highly qualified advisor?
Yeah, so I want to say, don't disregard cold LinkedIn messages for big company VPs. So it did result in it did result in CSO, it did result in Thermo Fisher, high up VP. So but you got to work it. It's always like all right, I'm interested to talk, but then you have to engage, and then you have to work that relationship once they get the first in. But it's harder to get investors with LinkedIn because they just get so much in, and so they're not really reading it. So yeah.
One strategy that worked for me was attending conferences where people I wanted as advisors were speaking, and you can just walk up to them after the talk and just ask your question right there and exchange your contact info. They're caught up in talking to everybody, they'll just answer your question.
Nice. Marc, what would you say?
Yeah, I totally agree with the prior two comments. One of the best jobs I ever had was being a telemarketer. I can't tell you how many people that hung up on me when I was a telemarketer, and it was just a really great job to have, because it taught me to just be relentless and brave and call 50 people to get 5, folks to engage with you, and, target a number of them, have something interesting to talk about, and don't be bashful, be polite, respectful of their time. And once you start to engage, make it interesting, and and if they, you know, at the end of the day, I think genuine people, you're genuinely interested in what you're doing, you know, that spark is going to come through, and you'll have an opportunity to connect. And I did, you know, read, and I do believe that, you know, as a startup, you know, founder and CEO, you know, that has some door opening, you know, potential in a particular market. You know, people appreciate the fact that you're taking a chance to build a company, and that takes, you know, initiative, and so they, you know, they don't downplay the opportunities to connect on a cold call. And even with cold call emails, sort of combining the last two things, you know, being at conferences, sometimes you'll leave a conference and you'll have a bag full of cards, and, you know, cold call email them afterwards and say, hey, it was great to see you at the conference, you know, super interested, want to continue a discussion. I have something that I think you might be interested in, and, you know, continue to follow up. And do so at the moment where they're still thinking about you and kind of remembering you. You know, that's the best time to sort of initiate the conversation, even if it doesn't turn into something in 3 months or in 6 months. You know, start the conversations.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. And yeah, I think most of the questions that we had from the audience had been answered directly or indirectly. I had a couple of questions that got answered. I have one question to all three of you. So the question is, there is a startup in its early stage, and people say, like, you can only raise money if you have some certain type of IP. But that particular startup don't have an IP. They have the human resource, they have the capability to do it, but there is not something innovative. Can they really work it out?
I think it kind of depends on, you know, what the solution is they're building, and what market they're going after, and how fast they can do it. You know, there's certainly value in, you know, and it kind of depends on how you define intellectual property too, IP. But you know, if you have a product that you build and you bring it to market quickly, and you're able to scale up to the point where you've got a sizable customer base, and you have traction, and you have, you know, market adoption, you know, that's got a real attractive, you know, dimension to it. And if there's the potential to create that kind of a profile, I think you possibly could get some investors interested in it, or at least engaged in the conversation. So it really becomes a conversation of market adoption, as opposed to a conversation about, you know, real tangible hardcore IP. But in any case, I think, you know, there's certainly a way to have a conversation around something that's unique about the product that would, you know, form some sort of a, you know, protective barrier, you know, to entry. And if that's a first mover advantage, in combination with some angle of product that makes it interesting, I think, you know, you potentially could get some conversations at least.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So basically the idea is, like, there is no such thing, like there are hardcore IPs, but you can still work on it without really having the hardcore IP, but rather just delegate that outsource that one particular task, right?
I think IP is sort of comes after product market fit, right? So I think the first question is, going back to the inputs and outputs question, what are the resources and sort of the technology consumables, like GPUs or storage or whatever you have on the cost model side, should generate a greater output on the revenue side. And if you can show like a picture of that equation, and say, hey, I can scale this very quickly. Sometimes even the fact that you can scale very fast, even if it's like not a novel idea, is very exciting to investors. There's a lot of successful companies that saw ideas happen in the States that were reproduced in different markets, and they got, you know, plenty of investment. So I think the key here is the ability to execute, the ability to go out there and get customers. And then once you like start acquiring market share, like IP is like how you protect your business, right? I think most investors see it that way. I do think IP first approaches, it might be a bit tricky because at some point as you're doing customer discovery, like what you have in your IP won't directly map to what the market wants. And sometimes you have to evolve it. So I think it's an iterative process. So don't like withhold yourself from starting something because you don't feel like you have the IP.
Just several points to add to that. When I was in IndieBio, not all the teams had like IP locked down, filed, or licensed when they initially entered. But certainly investors will hope that, you know, the more licensing you can get, or the more IP is a plus. But a lot of teams start without that. You know, they just have a publication showing that, yeah, in that general direction, that they're experts in that direction. Some people keep it as just trade secret. The other thing is IP is a long process and it's extremely expensive. So when would you define is you have IP? Because when you file, then you get a PCT, and then after a couple of years, it issues. From the time you filed to when you get it issued, it could be 3-4 years. So you can't wait you can't wait forever to get that issued and then start your company. And you don't have that much money to pour into that IP. So you just got to build it, you know, as you go.
So I would like to thank all the speakers, Sravan, Charlie, and Marc. Thank you very much for coming in here and giving us the valuable insight and your sharing your experience. It was really helpful. And thank you very much to the audience and each and everyone that you could attend. See you to the next event.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.